Okay, right, I think I'm ready to start then. Hopefully you can all hear me. So thank you so much for coming. I wanted to demonstrate today walking foot quilting because so much fun can be had with your walking foot if you just have a couple of ideas to take home with you. So this isn't my book, this is a book by Jackie Gearing called Walk. She's an American quilter. She has written this fantastic book. She makes beautiful geometric modern quilts and then she quilts them with walking foot quilting, and it's an aesthetic that I absolutely love. And so I have made a series of samples, mostly taken from this book. A couple of them are my own as well. And I just wanted to share with you some of my top tips for walking foot quilting and how I've made a couple of these samples. Okay, so for me, the first thing is to have a really good quality thread. I like to use cotton on cotton. But I know everyone has their own thread preferences. And also, I like to use the quilting gloves as well. So these don't have to be expensive. I think these were free with a magazine. They've lasted me absolutely ages. I really like them. You can obviously get branded ones as well, which are really nice. Sometimes you can use gardening gloves if they're not too chunky as well. You can get them quite inexpensively, but they just really help you grip the quilt. And I think that's particularly important if you're quilting a big quilt, can get a bit unruly, and you want to feel in control of it. And these rubber bits on the hands, they just help you grip the quilt a little bit better. So I definitely recommend using quilting gloves. Another thing that I find super useful when I'm walking foot quilting is a hero marker. So I tend not to put chemicals into my quilts, in that I don't like to use pens or anything, because there is a danger that it might disappear, but it might come back again. So I use a hero marker. It's just like this. It's just made of plastic, again, quite inexpensive, and then it's got like a sharp point, and you're literally just creasing the fabric, and then you're going to follow your crease line, but I'll explain a bit more about that in a minute. So I really like a hero marker. I find them very useful. And then I've made some quilt sandwiches here. I do use the basting spray because I find when I'm doing samples like this, for example, then I don't have all the pins in the way, and I don't have to be taking out pins as I go along. It's also much quicker. It's easier on my fingers. That's my personal preference for what I like to do. I know people have their own preferences for basting. So I'd just like to quickly go through the samples with you. So this is the first one that I'm going to demonstrate, the curvy crosshatch. So I'm going to show you how I've done that one in a minute. And then this is another variation on the crosshatch. And I've used a variegated thread with that one, which adds a nice element of interest. And then again, another variegated thread. This is the other one I'm going to demonstrate on the yellow. And I've actually used this. This one's very simple, and it's really effective on a big quilt as well, rather than just doing sort of straight vertical or horizontal lines. And I will show you how I do that one too. And then this one's really fun. Would you like me to go through and just explain how I've done the ones that I'm not actually demonstrating? Would that be useful? Okay, so I'm not demonstrating this one, so I'll just quickly talk about the orange one. So if you can imagine, you're going to do a grid first. So you're going to put in all of your your vertical lines first, and then rotate it, and then you put in all of the vertical lines so that you've created a grid. Now this grid is quite tight, and what you're going to be doing is then putting a diagonal line in. And as you can see, it's quite a steep line. And so if you find that that's quite tricky, what you can do is size it up. So I think this is 1 inch down, 1/2 inch across. So just use the ratios and double it, or even more than that to make it bigger. It just makes it a bit more manageable. Obviously, you wouldn't want to be doing it this densely necessarily on a larger quilt. So yes, you've done your grid, and then you do all of your horizontal lines one way on the diagonal, and then you go on to the other way. So that's how you do that one. Green. Okay, so this one, I love this one. It's one of my favourites because it looks really complicated. And actually, it's really very easy. So you put in your channels. You create your channels vertically. And then you take something like a chalk pencil. I quite like using a chalk pencil because you're not leaving a permanent mark. And then you mark at 2-inch intervals. And then this is where I like to use my hero marker. And I will mark in the lines joining up the dots so that I'm creating like a chevron pattern, almost zigzagging across horizontally. And so I do that for the whole quilt. And then when I've done that, I like to use my ruler again with my hero marker, and then I put a steeper line in and a steeper line. And so then I just fill them in to make that secondary pattern. And then that's it. So it's really just straight lines and just cleverly using. It's all about stages, planning each step one at a time and breaking it down and putting in your markings with your hero marker and with your chalk pencil. So that one's really good fun. I like that one. This one is the curved one. So again, you draw in your lines and then you mark at 3-inch intervals. And then what you do is at the 1.5-inch interval, you put a little dot with a chalk pencil. And then you're going to machine like this in a wavy line, but you're hitting that intersection where you've drawn your line at each time. So you do all of your downs on one side, and then you can rotate it and do it on the other side, and then you rotate it that way, and then do the same again to get that same effect. And that's really quite effective with the curves. But again, you're just using your walking foot. You're not free motion quilting. This one's really fun. I really like this one. And you can do it with triangles, or you can do it with the squares like I've done here. I've used the variegated thread here, which I think works really nicely. So again, it's all about your marking. So you mark 1 inch in at each corner. And then you can use your ruler and your hero marker, and you draw your line from point to point, and then you're just following that line. And you don't want to mark it all at once, because you think you know what you're doing, and then you get under the machine, and it can get very confusing. So you can just do it a bit at a time, and then it gets smaller and smaller. And so that one's really fun as well. And then the spiral one. So you're starting off tight, and then you're literally using the edge of the walking foot as a guide, and you're turning, turning, turning. And it gets easier as the circle gets bigger. So like with everything, when you start doing it, it's good to start small. So start on a small sample and see how you go. And then if you feel confident and you've got that muscle memory, to maybe try it on something bigger. And then, you're going to have more success. So start small and then get bigger. And then finally, this one is really fun. So what I did with this one, and this is what Jackie recommends in the book, is rather than having, literally hundreds of loose ends to tie off, what you do is you stitch a straight line, and then you do a series of really, really tiny short stitches, or on the Bernina, you can do a tie-off function as well. That's another option. And what I've done with this one is quite rigid, but as you can see, this bit's got a lovely sense of relief, and I've used a double layer of batting to create that effect. So if you want to have that Trapunto effect without actually doing the Trapunto technique, then that's one way of doing it. And by densely quilting this, you're making this really, really flat, and then this is coming out in relief. Oh, sorry, yes, of course. Do you want me to show the camera all of them? Yeah, okay. Right, fabulous. Okay, so this one is the Trapunto effect one. This is the spiral one. Okay. This one, I've forgotten what it's called, but it's the square getting smaller. This one is my favorite with the lotus flower. This one is with the wavy lines. That's the yellow one. And then we've got the crosshatches, this one, and the curvy crosshatch, which is what I'm going to demonstrate now. Okay, so I shall leave them out for you to have a look at. Please feel free to pass them around if you want to. I'm more than happy for you to touch them, that's no trouble. Okay, so I'm going to do the curvy crosshatch, which is one of my favourites because it's really simple, but it looks really effective. So I've got my hero marker, and I've done it already, but just to demonstrate how it works, I'm going to go from one corner to the other on the diagonal with my hero marker. I'm pressing quite hard because I want to be able to see it under my machine, and you're going to be stitching over this line. And the beauty is, if you do go wrong, you can just iron the line out. You don't have to worry about trying to remove the ink or anything like that. Yeah, so like I say, you might want to go over it a couple of times. I've already put my line in already, so it's there nice and clearly for me to follow, but I haven't used any chemicals or anything to mark my fabric. I'd also say don't make your line too curvy, just a gentle line. And then what we're going to do is stitch down that line. So stitch lengthwise, because we're going through 3 layers of fabric, hang on. Because we're going through 3 layers of fabric, I like to use quite a long stitch length. So sometimes I go up to even a 4. And I think that's what I've used on my samples as well, and I think it works quite nicely. Okay, so I've done my first line. All I'm going to do now is echo the line that I've already drawn, and I'm going to use the edge of my walking foot as my guide. So when I am on my machine, my eye isn't looking at the needle at all. My eye is literally following the previous line and the edge of the walking foot. I'm not looking at the needle at all because that's not going to help me. I need to follow the guide. So I'm going to do all of one side first. I probably won't do all of it because we won't have time. But I shall put in a few so you can see. So I'm going to complete all of this side first, then I will do all of that side. So I'll just carry on and put a few more lines in so that you can see. And again, I'm not looking at the needle at all. I'm just looking at the previous line that I've just stitched and the edge of my walking foot. So I'll put another line in. Now I'm not wearing my gloves, but I would recommend wearing gloves, particularly if you're doing a bigger quilt, just to help grip the quilt and it just gives you that sense of being in control a little bit more. You're in control of the fabric, it's not in control of you. Sorry? Yes, so you can use that as well if you're doing intervals of lines, absolutely. So I'm just going to put in one more line on this side. And so I'm now creating this really nice, gentle curve. And sometimes it's nice to use this style of quilting when you've got curves in your piecing as well. So it's nice to echo the quilting to reflect the piecing, I find. So this is my central line, and I've just worked so far this side. So I won't do the whole thing, but I'm going to turn it around now, and I'm going to do a few lines on this side just so that you can see. I'm just very gently guiding the fabric. You don't want to be, that's why it's important to keep this curve quite a gentle curve. add in a few more lines. And sometimes you might just do half of the lines and think, actually, I don't need to crosshatch it. Sometimes it might be too much. It's very much dependent on the piecing that you've done. If it's very simple piecing, then you might want to do something more complex with your quilting. But you really want to make sure you find a balance between the piecing and the quilting. You have to think about what's more important. What do you want to shine? You don't want the quilting to overshadow piecing. You have to find what's the right balance for the piece that you've already created. Yes, so I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but some of these samples are taken from this book, Jackie Gearing's book called Walk. And there's many, many fantastic ideas for walking foot quilting in here. I'm just demonstrating a couple of them, and then I've got some here that you can have a look at as well. Okay, I'm just going to put one more line in, and then I will show you how we do the crosshatch. And that's when it really starts to take shape. So I'm just doing gentle curves. And sometimes people, when I've done this with other quilters, they get worried thinking, oh, it's not looking perfect, they're not completely even. You don't need to worry too much, because when you put your second layer of wavy lines in the opposite direction, suddenly you're looking at it as a whole. You're not looking at channels like this, because we've done the crosshatch over the top. So I'll show you what I mean. So we're just going to do exactly the same thing again. We're going to take our hero marker, and we're just going to put a very gentle curve from one corner to the other on the diagonal. And so I'm going to stitch down that line first, so I'll do that now. And then I'm going to add in my lines, and that's when you'll see, hopefully, how it starts to take shape. And if people are sometimes concerned that they can't see the line of the hero marker, so I've just done it the once, and it's almost coming up like a white line on here, actually, when I'm looking down. I can see it perfectly fine, and you can go over the hero marker on your line a couple of times, because you're stitching over that line anyway. So, and if you do it wrong, you can just iron it out, because you're just scoring the fabric. You're not actually marking the fabric at all. So I've put my line now in the other direction, going from the one diagonal to the other, a very gentle curve. And now I'm just going to work on one side. And again, I'm just following the line that I've already stitched. My eye is following the edge of the walking foot and the line that I've stitched previously. I'm not looking at the needle at any point, because looking at the needle won't help me, apart from when I get to the end, so I know to stop. But apart from that, I'm not looking at the needle at all. So as you can see already, we're getting quite a nice formation there, but I'll keep going so that you can see the full effect. And all of the little squares, well, they're not actually squares, but they are all different sizes, and that's why you don't need to worry too much about, if your lines aren't exactly parallel to one another. It all just works out in the end, so I really don't worry about that too much. I wouldn't look at it until you've finished almost, because it works out fine. Lots of quilters have done this with me, and they've all looked fabulous. So I'm just working over to one side of that original line that I drew. Just put one more in, and then I'll work on the other side. And it may be that you might not want to do the whole quilt anyway in that formation. It's quite nice like this, and then you could fill these negative spaces with straight lines maybe, or something completely different. But can you see it's starting to take on that nice wavy line crosshatch effect. So I'm just going to add a couple of rows now to the other side of my starting line. And if anyone's got any questions, I shall do my very best to answer them. Yeah, of course. Yes. On the walking foot? Oh, that's a very good question. I shall field it to one of my colleagues in a minute. Okay, that is a good question. Is it something you use a lot, the decorative stitching? Right. I mean, really, the walking foot is designed for, when you're quilting, when you've got the 3 layers, because it feeds those 3 layers in. So, were you thinking of decorative stitching for quilting? I am sure it's, like I say, I wouldn't like to say the wrong thing, so I shall ask my colleague. But yes, it's nice to know that you can, as long as the feed dogs are up. There we go. So we've all learned something today. Okay, so I'm just putting in the final line now, and then I can show you how this is taking shape. And I think this is a technique that would work really well on a large quilt, actually, because it's essentially straight line quilting, but you're just putting a very gentle curve into it. So you're not having to sort of manipulate a lot of fabric under the machine as if you were, free motion quilting or doing something quite complex. It's really quite easy to do, but I think very effective. So there we go. If you just look at that central bit, you'll see then how, can I just borrow that one? Thank you. How it's starting to come together. I've used a contrasting thread, so hopefully you can see it. You see over there? Yeah. So I really like that one because, like I say, I think it's one of the easy ones, but actually it's really effective. Okay, so I wanted to demonstrate the yellow one next. Could I just borrow the yellow one back? Thank you. So this one, I've used this on a big quilt as well, and it worked really nicely. It just added a little bit more interest than, say, vertical or horizontal straight line quilting. So the way I do this, again, it's all about the marking and the preparation. So what I do first is I use my hero marker, and I would do exactly the same on a bigger quilt. I wouldn't do it any other way. So I use my hero marker, and then a ruler as well, a longer ruler, obviously, if you're doing a bigger quilt. And then I just draw in, I've done it already, but I just draw in a cross on my quilt. Now, it's also really useful. Actually, I'm going to do that bit first. I'm going to stitch that bit first, and then I will tell you the next bit. So if you're doing this on a big quilt, I also find by putting these lines in, it just helps stabilize the quilt. Putting the cross in first if you're doing a big quilt. It actually works really, it just helps to stabilize things. So what we're doing is we are dividing the quilt into 4 quadrants. And then we're going to work on 1 quadrant at a time. And I really like doing it this way because particularly I've done this on quite large quilts. And it breaks it down. It makes it less imposing. So I think, right, tonight and tomorrow I'm just working on this quarter, and then, the next day I'm just going to work on this section. By breaking it down, it makes it more manageable. So I think that's a really good idea. So I'm just putting in my cross, following the line that I've drawn with my hero marker. You can go over the line several times with your hero marker. You may want to use a chalk pencil. It also depends on the colours of your quilt as well. I mean, if you've got a white quilt, a white chalk pencil is not going to be helpful. A hero marker, I find, works with most fabrics. It shows up on most fabrics. So that's another advantage. Okay, so I've made my quadrant now. And I'm going to be working one quadrant at a time. And I'm going to start with this one. And I'm going to stitch that V inside it, getting smaller and smaller. Now, a really useful tip is when you're stitching along here, you need to know when to stop, because you might stop too early and then the channels aren't going to be the same. So a little way around that is you can use your ruler and you can just draw in lightly a hero marker line. So then when I'm stitching, when I get to this point here, I know that that's the point that I need to stop. So again, I'm just going to follow the line that I've stitched previously. And then I'm getting closer now, so I'm slowing down, getting to my hero marker line. There we are. And then I'm just going to rotate. Hang on, I think I'm just going to put one more in. Oops. So you have to forgive me. I'm not used to this sewing machine, so it's not going quite as well as it would when I wasn't being watched by lots of people. So forgive me. But I'm going to keep going. So now I've done my rotation, and then I'm just going to follow. And it is a little bit wonky, but please look at the other sample, which isn't. There we go. It's not too bad. It's not too bad. Okay, so I've done my first line, and then I'm just going to keep going. I'll just put one more in. Okay. And then what I like to do, once I've finished this, this quadrant here, I will then do the opposite one. Ooh. Okay, so, okay, so what I do then is I've done this one. Please don't look too closely. Let's look at this one. So I'm going to finish that one, and then I put that one in there, and then I put these ones in like that. Okay, so any questions at all? I would really encourage you to have a play, actually, with the walking foot, because, as you can see, there's so many different things, so much fun you can have with it, and it is just literally following that process, putting in the markings, and breaking it down step by step, and then you can get some really exciting results. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.